She found the letter lying on the floor, but no one had ever dropped it there. It was just past midnight. The hospital lights cast a greenish hue on the walls, and the corridors hung somewhere between the world of the living and the silence of those still holding on. Lucy had only stepped out to get a cup of water, but something made her stop. There, between the elevator doors and the peeling paint on the wall, was a beige envelope, stained around the edges as if it had been soaked. It was face down, but a handwritten sentence covered the back entirely. Open only if you're too tired to keep going. She froze. Tired. She was beyond tired. But who would write something like that? And how could they know? She looked around. No one. Just the distant sound of a heart monitor, a rolling chair somewhere, and the invisible weight of exhaustion. She picked up the envelope gently. The paper was warm, as if someone had just placed it there. And then she noticed something else, something impossible. The date written in the bottom corner. It was tomorrow's date. Lucy pressed the envelope. Against her chest, her eyes welled up. This wasn't normal. This was a calling. She hadn't prayed in days. Not for her father, not for herself. But touching that letter felt like someone had written exactly what she didn't even know. How to ask for. If you're living through a time when even praying feels too hard. If someone you love is in a hospital bed right now, fighting, and you no longer have the words, write their name in the comments below. Or just speak a word of faith. Maybe, just maybe, this is the letter someone has been waiting to find. It was there, in that forgotten hallway, that something began to awaken. Lucy was used to being unseen. Not out of cruelty, but because exhaustion made her invisible. She spent her days by her father's side, watching the same walls, hearing the same intercom alerts, being referred to not by name but by roles. The daughter of the patient in 414, the full-time companion. She had learned to exist. In the space between medical visits and sleepless nights, holding a cup of cold coffee while the world outside kept spinning. That morning, everything looked the same. Her father still lay there, eyes half closed, skin pale, fingers motionless atop the blanket. The machines beeped with a rhythm that felt more like a countdown than a lifeline. Lucy stepped closer and gently pulled the blanket up over his chest. The gesture was almost ritualistic, as if, by covering his body, she could protect something that medicine could no longer reach. Deep down, she knew she wasn't the only one who was tired. He was, too, but so was she. Not in her body, in her soul. It had been weeks since she last dreamed, days since she'd eaten properly, nights since she had even cried, because her body had learned to mute the pain just to survive. But what consumed her most was the silence of God, a silence that felt cold, absent, almost indifferent. It was in that unnamed exhaustion that she found the letter. She had only gone out to fill a water bottle, but the sight of that envelope, with its handwritten message, stopped her in her tracks. Open only if you're too tired to keep going. She didn't know if it was divine provocation or a coincidence sharp enough to pierce through meaning, but in that very instant, she knew she couldn't ignore it. She took the envelope with her, sat down in a chair just steps from her father's room and took a deep breath, looked around. Everyone seemed wrapped up in their own grief, and so she opened it. The letter was simple, white paper, blue ink, a firm emotional handwriting, but the words felt like they had been written by someone's soul. God still guards those who grew weary trying to save others. She read it again, then again. By the third reading, her vision was already blurred with tears. Lucy shut her eyes tight, tried to recall if she had read those words in a book, if it was part of a scripture, if maybe someone from the ward had written it as a comfort. But no, it was too personal, too precise. It was as if someone had reached into her heart and pulled out the very words she didn't even dare whisper in prayer anymore. She returned to the room like someone coming back from a sacred encounter, tucked the letter into her bag, between an old Bible and a notebook where she used to write down her dad's medication schedule. But that day, she couldn't write a thing. She spent hours sitting, watching her father's hand, feeling time slide through her fingers like sand, unsure whether she was there to take care of him or to be cared for by something she couldn't name. At lunch, she refused the tray. She wasn't hungry. Instead, she stepped out again, walked a little, breathed the air outside that room that smelled like disinfectant and absence. In the corridor, her footsteps echoed louder than usual, and it was on that second walk that something strange happened. An older woman, grey hair, vacant eyes, stopped beside her and, for no apparent reason, said, "You look like someone waiting for God to answer." Then she walked away, as if it had been just a casual comment. But Lucy froze. That was exactly it. She was waiting. Not for test results, not for medical predictions, but for a response from God. A sign that believing still made sense. That night, back in the room, she picked up the letter again, read it in silence, and at the bottom of the page, she saw something that hadn't been there before. A signature, small, in the lower corner, the one who still believes in promises. She was certain that hadn't been there. She had read the letter countless times. The paper hadn't changed, but the signature, it had simply appeared. A chill ran down her spine. It wasn't fear, it was presence, as if someone was there not in body, but in intention, as if faith hadn't died, only fallen asleep. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in days, she prayed without asking for anything. She only said, "If you're still with me, then don't let me fall." And in that very moment, she felt what no medicine could explain: relief. Not her father's healing, not a revelation, but a truce inside her soul. And without even realizing it, Lucy fell asleep right there, her head resting on the edge of the bed, the letter between her fingers, and her heart beating to the rhythm of a hope she didn't yet know how to name. Lucy woke to the sound of curtains being drawn by the nurse. Morning light poured slantwise through the hospital windows, revealing specks of dust suspended in the air, as if even they were waiting for an answer. Her father was still asleep. The fever had lowered slightly, but his expression remained distant, nearly surrendered. Lucy, still holding the letter, lifted her head slowly, like someone returning from a place that has no name she had dreamed of, that she was sure. But what she saw in the dream remained blurry, as if it had been made of mist and emotion. She remembered only a single sentence, spoken by a man's voice, calm but firm. "You'll understand why someday." She didn't know who had said it. Maybe it was her father, maybe God, maybe someone she hadn't met yet. As she brushed her teeth in the small bathroom next to the room, the sentence kept circling in her mind, like an echo refusing to fade. When she returned, she sat in her usual chair, pulled out the notebook from her backpack, and decided to reread the mysterious letter carefully, slowly. She needed to understand. She needed clarity. This time, she read with less wounded eyes. The words, already familiar, seemed different now, as if, when read with more peace, they revealed layers that had been hidden. It felt like a psalm tucked between ordinary lines. And then, at the bottom of the page, something caught her eye. A small, almost faded biblical reference, something she was certain she hadn't seen before. Psalm 121:7. Lucy frowned. She knew the Psalms, had grown up hearing her father recite them aloud at the dinner table. But that specific verse didn't ring a bell. She grabbed the small Bible from the bottom of her bag and searched. She found it quickly. "The Lord will keep you from all harm. He will guard your life." She read it aloud, softly, as if reading it inwardly. And then, a shiver. It was beautiful, yes, but it didn't match what had been in the letter. She picked up the paper again, compared them, and froze. The version in the letter read, "The Lord will keep you even from what you don't yet understand. He will guard your soul even when you give up." It was longer, more intimate, more raw, and more necessary. Did someone write this based on the original psalm? She wondered. Maybe it was an adaptation, an emotional reinterpretation. But who would write something like that and leave it in the middle of a hospital? And more importantly, why her? The difference between the texts disturbed her. One spoke of protection, the other of rescue, of a God who not only shields from danger, but who also guards people from their own surrender. And that's when she understood. The psalm wasn't a quotation, it was an answer. It was as if someone had rewritten the verse to fit exactly into the pain she couldn't put into words. She placed her hand on her face, took a deep breath, and wrote in her notebook, "If this verse is true, then God is still with me even when I don't feel anything anymore." She closed her eyes. The silence in the room was punctuated only by the steady beeping of the heart monitor. But even that sound felt different now, lighter, as if something invisible had slipped in through the window crack and changed the atmosphere. She decided to step out for a few minutes. She needed to walk, to think. In the hallway, she crossed paths with a man she'd never seen before. He wore a badge, but wasn't dressed like the staff. He was sitting with a thick book in his hands, and a calm smile on his face. As she walked past, he looked up and said, Some versions of the truth only appear to those who've been broken enough to recognize them. She stopped. The man looked back down at the book and said nothing more. Lucy kept walking, but something inside her had changed. She couldn't explain what. She could only feel it. At the cafeteria, she grabbed a coffee, sat alone, and once again, on the back of the letter, she wrote, "If I must start over, at least let me know I'm not alone." It was then that her phone rang. The front desk. They asked her to go to the inpatient department to sign a pending document. Routine stuff. But as she got up and left the room, she noticed that the man's book was still open on the bench. She couldn't resist. She walked over and glanced at the page. It was Psalm 121. Her heart raced. That couldn't be a coincidence. Not anymore. And it was right there, in the middle of the hallway, with her coffee trembling in her hands, that Lucy knew the letter hadn't been forgotten. It had been left on purpose. Back in the room, Lucy's hands were cold, but her heart felt warm. Her notebook now held more than medical notes. It held questions, confessions, small prayers scribbled between medication times and exam reminders. Everything inside her felt jumbled like faith, doubt, exhaustion, and mystery had stopped living. In separate rooms, her father still slept, breathing heavily, but not in pain. The afternoon light spread across his face as if time had briefly reversed. Lucy watched him like someone trying to memorize something that might soon disappear. But that day, something was different. She wasn't just waiting for the inevitable, she was searching for meaning. She picked up her Bible again, returned to Psalm 121, read it from beginning to end. It was short, the kind of passage that, in other seasons, she might have skimmed over. But now, each sentence felt like a whisper. "I lift up my eyes to the mountains." She stopped there, took a breath, looked out the window. The city in the distance looked layered buildings, hills, clouds, but no mountain was high enough to hide what she felt. The psalm continued, "Where does my help come from?" And there it was, the question, hers, the one asked by everyone, crossing a hospital more afraid than faithful. The psalm seemed to know exactly what to ask, seemed to already carry the answer. "My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth." But if God made everything, why was her father still there, surrounded by wires and waiting? Lucy closed the book. Her heart was tight, but not rebellious. She wasn't expecting a miracle anymore. She just longed for presence. Then she looked again at the letter. The referenced psalm was the same, but the words were different. It was as if the letter had translated the verse into her own pain, an emotional version, a spiritual version. And that's when the strangest question of all arrived. What if this psalm wasn't just written in the Bible, but also written into the story of those who suffer? For the first time, Lucy felt the psalms might not have been meant just to be read. Maybe they were meant to be lived. Maybe they were paths. Maybe windows. She stood up, opened the drawer in the hospital room, and found a Bible that belonged to the facility. One of those old ones, with yellowing pages and a worn leather cover. She opened it to the same passage, Psalm 121. But something strange happened. Verse 7 was underlined, and next to it, in pencil, was a phrase, "Even when you give up, he keeps guarding you." Lucy stepped back. Her body shivered. It couldn't be. It was the exact phrase from the letter, the same idea, the same voice. "Who wrote this here?" she whispered, not expecting an answer. She closed the Bible, but her heart was far from quiet. It felt as if the text was following her, or maybe as if it had been written in both places at once, on the page and in her soul. She decided to copy the two versions, the one from the Bible and the one from the letter, side by side in her notebook. And as she wrote, she realized something. There wasn't a contradiction between them. There was depth. The traditional version spoke of what God does. The anonymous version spoke of how he does it. And that changed everything. "Maybe the Bible doesn't change, but the way it speaks to me does," she wrote. Her father stirred in bed, let out a soft groan, as if trying to say something, but couldn't quite form it. Lucy stepped closer, held his hand, and for the first time, she didn't cry, didn't plead. She just stayed there, in silence, present, as if her presence, in that moment, had become a living prayer. Minutes later, a nurse entered. She carried the medications and a white envelope. "This arrived at the front desk with your name on it," she said, "but there's no sender." Lucy took it carefully. The envelope was sealed with a small golden sticker. Simple, but it held an aura. Sacred. She opened it with trembling. Hands inside, just a small piece of paper, written in the same handwriting as the previous letter. When you grow tired, God keeps going. When you stop, God begins. She sat down, trying to breathe. The room felt too quiet, as if the world had held its breath along with her. And then, she realized something she hadn't noticed before. None of these messages were trying to save her from suffering. They were trying to lead her through it, without breaking. And that's when she understood. The psalm wasn't just hidden in the letter, it was hidden in her exhaustion. The long, silent night fell heavily over the hospital. It was the kind of silence that doesn't soothe, it weighs. Outside, the city lights blinked in the distance, hesitating between staying on or giving up. Lucy couldn't sleep. She sat quietly beside her father, wrapped in a thin cotton blanket. The letter folded between her hands, her mind racing with questions that no longer knew if they were even prayers. She closed her eyes, not to rest, but to escape the outside world for a little, fragile bit. Her body ached with weariness, but her mind refused to shut down. And then she heard it, a voice, gentle, almost a whisper, reciting, "He will not let your foot be moved. He who keeps you will not slumber." She opened her eyes with a start, looked around. The room was empty. Her father was sound asleep. No one else was there, but that voice. She was certain she had heard it. She stood up, walked to the door, peeked down the hallway. It was empty. The dim sensor lights lit just enough to avoid tripping on wires. No nurses nearby. No lost visitors. Nothing. She returned inside, locking the door gently. But something in her heart had already been unlocked. "God, was it you who spoke?" she whispered. The question floated in the air like a leaf suspended before touching the ground. There was no audible reply, but there was something else. Peace. A strange peace, almost too gentle for that place. As if the presence of something greater had been merely hinted, but deeply felt. She sat again, and that's when she saw it. On the floor, near the armchair, a new folded piece of paper, folded into four, placed as if intentionally. Lucy picked it up carefully. As she unfolded it, she saw the familiar handwriting. Just one brief sentence. "You are not alone in how you feel. I've been there too." She pressed the paper to her chest, took a deep breath, and felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. Comfort, not because the pain was gone, but because she now knew she wasn't the only one walking through that kind of desert. She looked closely at her father. He was sleeping differently now. His chest rose and fell slowly, as if touched by something unseen. Lucy held his hand. The skin was warm. His fingers didn't respond, but they were there, present, and that was enough. Then she did something she hadn't done in a long time. She prayed with simple words, formless, with no expectations. She wasn't praying for healing, answers, or miracles. She was praying for surrender, for acceptance, for presence. "God, if you are here, then teach me to keep walking, even when everything feels like it's standing still." The reply didn't come in sound, but it came in a memory. From her childhood, she, sitting on her father's lap, hearing him say, "The strongest psalm is the one you pray when you have no strength to open your mouth." She smiled gently. The tears came softly, without warning, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of reunion with herself, with the faith that still lived in a forgotten corner of her chest. Later, as she reorganized her bag, she found an old notebook she used at the beginning of the hospitalization. It was full of medical notes, schedules, medication names, but there, between the pages, she found a loose sheet, a paper that, by all appearances, wasn't hers. On the page it read, "The prayer you thought God didn't hear was the one he saved for the exact moment." That broke Lucy. It was too precise to be chance, too detailed to be coincidence. And in that moment, everything became clear. Someone, or something, had been leaving messages for her. Not by accident, not by routine, but by mercy. And so, she decided to write back. She took a blank sheet, the same kind she used for medication orders, and wrote, "If you're reading this after me, know this: God still speaks, and sometimes he speaks to those who stopped searching. Keep going, even if it's just to breathe one more day. I was where you are, and I'm no longer alone." She folded the sheet carefully. She placed it inside the room's Bible, between Psalm 121 and 122, not as someone who closes a cycle, but as someone who plants something for the next person to find. And it was in that dawn, between whispers, anonymous notes, and inexplicable peace that Lucy understood. The psalm didn't come to heal her father's body, it came to protect her soul. That day's sunrise came differently. It wasn't the sun that woke Lucy up, nor the movement of nurses changing shifts. It was the sound of her father's own voice. Weak, yes, but audible, clear as if coming from somewhere between the soul and the already tired body. Lucy, she jumped up, accidentally knocking over the plastic cup beside the chair. She rushed to his side, heart racing. "Dad, did you speak?" He slowly opened his eyes. They were sunken, but alive. He moved his lips again, almost without strength. "He kept my soul, even when I no longer knew how to ask." That phrase wasn't his. It was from the psalm, from the letter, from what had been appearing day after day, night after night. Lucy's eyes welled up. That morning, which was supposed to be just like all the others, had become sacred. She sat beside him, holding his hand, and for the first time, he squeezed back. A simple gesture, but in that context, it was a miracle in human form. "Did you dream, Dad?" she asked softly. He closed his eyes for a moment and murmured, "I saw a ladder, and at the top, someone told me it wasn't time yet, that my daughter needed to understand first." Lucy didn't know what to say. The weight of those words was far greater than she could bear, but at that moment, there was no need to say anything, just to listen, just to be there. Hours later, while he rested again, a cleaning assistant entered the room. She swept quickly and efficiently, but as she left, accidentally dropped a paper from her pocket. It was a handmade bookmark. Lucy picked it up to return it, but before she could, she saw what was written. "The Lord will watch over your coming and going, both now and forevermore." Psalm 121:8. She froze. Another verse, another sign, another piece in the puzzle of silent mercies being revealed before her eyes. The assistant thanked her with a smile and left, without knowing or maybe knowing that she had just delivered yet another seed for Lucy's invisible garden of faith. That afternoon, Lucy was called to the reception. A routine procedure, updating information, signing documents. The path there was long, through hallways she already knew by heart. But something caught her attention. On the wall near the elevator, someone had set up a bulletin board with anonymous messages, notes, verses, words of hope left by patients, companions, and staff. She stepped closer. Among dozens of messages, she recognized the handwriting. It was the same as the letters. "You didn't get here by chance. The same God who brought you this far will sustain you to keep going." She read and reread it, touched the paper as one touches a memory, and decided to leave one to grabbed one of the available notes and slowly wrote, "If you find this message, no, he hasn't forgotten you, not for a single second." She pinned it on the board and stayed there for a few minutes, watching, not the messages but the people walking by. Some stopped, others didn't, but all of them carried, in some way, the same invisible weight. And there, before that improvised altar of paper, Lucy felt something new, lightness, as if her burden was being shared with others, as if her pain had been recycled into comfort, as if, for the first time, she was praying, not for herself, but with others. Back in the room, she found her father awake, eyes fixed on the ceiling. When she entered, he smiled, a simple smile, but full of something she hadn't seen in a long time. "Peace, Dad. Would you like me to read something?" He nodded slowly, and replied with effort, "Read that one." The one from the letter. Lucy knew which one. She grabbed the notebook, opened it to the page where she had copied both versions of the psalm, sat close, and read softly. "The Lord will guard you even from what you still don't understand. He will guard your soul even when you give up." He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and whispered, "That's it. That's what I needed to remember." Lucy bowed her head. She touched his forehead gently. They stayed like that for a few minutes, no words, just presence, just faith. At the end of the day, a doctor came in to run some exams. His clinical condition hadn't improved, but something in her hesitated before leaving. "Miss Graham, his condition remains stable, but something's changed. He seems ... stronger on the inside." Lucy smiled, and replied without hesitation, "Because now, he's being protected by something we can't see." The next morning, Lucy arrived earlier at the hospital. She carried a small bag with 2 books, a new scarf for her father, and an envelope. The envelope was white, simple, but inside was a letter she had written during the night, not for herself, but for someone yet to come. She didn't know who. She only knew she needed to leave it behind and let it move forward. Her father was still sleeping. There was a serenity on his face she hadn't seen in a long time, as if, even without words, he was saying, "I am at peace." Lucy adjusted his pillow, covered his feet gently, and left a soft kiss on his forehead. She sat down and took the letter from her bag, read it one last time. Her handwriting was a bit shaky, but steady. The letter read, "If you're reading this, maybe you're tired too. Maybe you feel alone. Maybe you've been living through long nights, waiting for answers. I don't have them all, but I've discovered that, even when everything feels silent, God is still guarding our soul. Sometimes He speaks through psalms, other times through letters, sometimes through a nurse who crosses your path, and sometimes He just sits next to you in silence and stays. And that's enough. Keep going. Breathe. You are stronger than you think." She folded the letter and placed it inside the same Bible where she had found the marked verse. Psalm 121 now held more than a pencil mark. It held testimony. Before leaving the room, she set the Bible down on the bedside table. Her father, still with his eyes closed, held the blanket with one hand. The other rested freely as if it were waiting for something. Lucy held it for a moment, then whispered her goodbye. "I'll be right back, but I know that even if I didn't come back, you'd still be guarded." She walked down the hospital floors with slow steps. Her heart was tight, yet light. She knew something inside her had changed, but what she didn't know was that the story wouldn't end there. At reception, a staff member called her. "Miss Lucy." She turned. "A lady left this envelope for you. Said it was important, but didn't leave a name." Lucy took the envelope. The paper was yellowed, the seal old. She opened it slowly. Inside, only a single sheet, written in different handwriting than before, but with the same spiritual firmness. Sometimes, God uses those who've been through pain, to write the answer for those who are still arriving. She smiled, eyes filled with tears, because she understood the letter she had found hadn't been written just for her, but also by her, in another time, maybe in another place, maybe by someone she would never meet. Hours later, while waiting for her father's test results, she decided to visit the message board, the same one where she had left a note days earlier. And there, at the center of the board, she saw something new, a note, written in handwriting that looked very much like hers. "The letter you found, also found you. Now, it's your turn to write the next one." It was as if God was stitching people together through words. That night, before leaving, she stopped by the small makeshift chapel on the 3rd floor. It was empty. There was only a bench, a table with a wooden cross, and a lit candle. In the corner, a box where people could leave anonymous prayers. Lucy wrote one more. "Lord, thank you for not leaving me alone while I cared for someone I loved, and thank you for caring for me, even when I forgot I needed care too." She placed the paper there, closed her eyes for a moment, and for the first time, asked for nothing more. Faith had returned not as thunder, but as breeze, not as an answer, but as presence. As she left the chapel, she crossed paths with a woman with tired eyes, holding the hand of a little girl with a scarf on her head. Lucy looked at her, paused, and extended something, the same original letter she had once found lying on the ground. "This is for you." The woman hesitated. I don't know if I can read it right now." Lucy smiled. "That's okay. This letter knows how to wait." And right there, in that brief and sacred moment, she knew the promise God had written for her would now be passed from hand to hand, because words born out of pain don't die. They become seeds. They become psalms. They become miracles. If you've made it this far, maybe you're also going through something no one sees. Maybe you're caring for someone. Maybe you're fighting inside while smiling on the outside. Maybe you've reached your limit and you're waiting for a sign, any sign, that you're not alone. Maybe this story was that sign, because Lucy didn't just find a letter. She found a divine reminder, a sacred echo, a hidden psalm that wasn't just in the scriptures, but in the very experience of being human, of breaking and still choosing to continue. Today, I want to invite you to say a prayer, not a complicated one. You don't need the right words, you just need to be present. Because Psalm 121 isn't just a passage, it's a hug hidden between the pages of the Bible. And today, it's for you. Pray with me now. Lord, I'm tired. sometimes more than I can admit. There are days I don't know how to go on or where to begin again, but today I choose to trust. Even without understanding, I lift my eyes to you. Guard my soul, Lord, not just from the evil outside, but from the pain inside. Guard me when I can no longer pray. Guard me when I don't know what to ask for. Guard me even when I stop, because I believe you never stop. And that's what keeps me going. In Jesus' name, amen. If this prayer spoke to you, comment below the name of someone who needs to be guarded by God, or just write a single word of faith. Maybe someone is waiting for it right now.